Welcome back to the Rise with Anita podcast, or welcome if you're new here. This is the space where ambition meets embodiment, where soul meets strategy, and where we explore what it truly means to heal, grow, and reconnect to who we are beneath the noise of the world around us. Today's conversation is one I've been looking forward to for the last month. I am joined by Julie Ryan, psychic medium, medical intuitive, investor, entrepreneur, author, and someone who has spent decades helping people understand the connection between intuition, healing, spirituality, and what exists beyond what we can physically see. What fascinates me most about Julie's work, isn't simply her ability to communicate with spirit or facilitate energetic healings. It's actually the ability that she teaches these abilities to being something that is available to all of us. Because whether we call it intuition, inner knowing, divine guidance, or simply trusting ourselves, I think many of us have experienced moments where we felt something before we could logically explain it. And yet, so many people tend to doubt it. They second guess or dismiss it entirely. So today we're exploring what it means to strengthen that connection, trust our inner guidance, navigate grief and life's transitions with greater peace, and ultimately feeling more connected to something larger than ourselves. But before we dive in, I'm going to begin by having us arrive together. So if you and the audience would mind joining me in a breath real quick. So if you're able to do so, gently place your feet on the ground, relax your shoulders, unclench your jaw, and take a grounding deep breath in, inhaling through the nose for 4, hold for 4, and then slowly release through the mouth for 6. Again, breathing in for 4, holding for 4, and releasing through the mouth for 6. And just noticing, how am I arriving in this present moment? Without the need to change anything, just creating the awareness and the space. And from that place, we begin. Julie, I'm so excited to have you here.
Oh, I'm so delighted to be with you.
I always start my podcast with this question, which is, before we get into the resume, and you have quite a resume,
I've lived
what
a long time.
just makes you wise?
Yeah, yeah.
What is bringing you joy in this current season of life?
All my flowers, everything that's blooming. I live in Birmingham, Alabama, and I lived in LA for a long time, and I have everything in my garden here that I had in LA. So my magnolias are in bloom, all my gardenias, my hydrangeas, my calla lilies, my guara, all these gorgeous, glorious flowers are in bloom and everything's green. And it's just this heavenly scent when you walk outside between these massive magnolia trees that I have that are full of blossoms and then gardenias. And it's just heavenly. So that brings me a lot of joy.
Beautiful. So it sounds like you have a green thumb.
I do. I do. I love it. I designed our garden and I have help too because it's pretty big. It's about an acre and a half, but
That's
planted
incredible.
planted all the trees, put all the bushes in, did all of that and so I have something all year long that blooms. In the wintertime I have camellias and other winter blooming things and we have all 4 seasons here, but it's just gorgeous, gorgeous here.
That sounds amazing. And I'm actually from LA. I have to say, when I read your Angelic Attendance book, the notion of the Armenian Gypsy Voodoo line had me literally just cracking up.
With the Armenian connection.
Yeah, I was like, oh, that sounds about right. If you don't know, you don't know. So diving straight into it, I think one of the most fascinating things about your story is you didn't start off with these gifts that were typically you hear psychic mediums and it's like, I've been seeing ghosts since I was like 7 years old and they're just appearing to me. For you,
Yeah,
it really happened later in life.
yeah,
And first and foremost, you were a businesswoman, are a
right.
businesswoman. And I think what's amazing is you were building businesses, inventing, not investing, excuse me, medical devices and operating in environments many people could consider very highly analytical.
Yeah.
And on this other side, you have this highly intuitive notion. So do you think that without knowing at the time, you were kind of using your intuitive gifts with what you were doing in business without having realized it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. To your point, Anita, I didn't have dead people chasing me as a child, or if I did, I wouldn't have known what to do with that. So yeah, absolutely. I think being an entrepreneur and I founded 9 companies in 5 industries. People go, well, how's that work? And I said, well, I took money from one and I was interested in something else. So I founded something else. And I am a typical entrepreneur. I'm a wildcatter. I have an idea. I explore it. If it looks like it's got a runway, I start running down the runway. And then I bring in the experts, the engineers, and the financial people and stuff like that. So I'm definitely the idea girl. And I have a degree in communications. How does that work as inventing surgical devices? And it really doesn't, other than I hired some really good engineers who could draw out what my ideas were. But I'm sure I was being inspired by spirit through all of those times. And I look back on that part of my life too, Anita. I moved to LA at 24. I'd never been there before, and I didn't know anybody who lived there. And I look back at that now and I think, my God, that was some golden ovary courage. You know, guys have breast balls and girls have golden ovaries. And and I think that was a big step for
Yeah.
me to do that. But I was led and I followed it and all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. And when I look back on my life, I just turned 67. And when I look back on my life, and I got lots more living to do. I mean, I'm gonna live probably to be 130 or so, is what I'm thinking now. I think you can just see every step of the way we're led, even if it's a circuitous route. I like to use the yellow brick road from The Wizard of Oz as an example. And you're on the yellow brick road and you're headed to Oz, and you may end up in a field of poppies on a sunny day and take a nap, and it's wonderful. Or you may end up in a haunted castle being chased by flying monkeys. But when you're in that haunted castle, although it's scary, you're being led to notice there's a pail of water in the corner there. And you're led to pick it up and throw it on the Wicked Witch, and she melts, and then you're the hero, and then you're back on your path. So we could say that's a circuitous route. It's not something that was planned, and yet it served a purpose. So I think that's how all of our lives are.
That's such a beautiful answer. And I have to now lean in. What was the pull to LA of all places for you, having not been there before?
I was in the hospital supply industry, and I was selling supplies to hospitals in a region. And so I was working for this huge company, and they downsized, and my job was being eliminated, and they offered me a job in a place I didn't want to go to, didn't want to live in. And I was living in a place that got a lot of snow, and I swore I'd never live where it snowed again, and I haven't, by the way. So at 24, I looked at the country and I saw where people in my company were sales reps and they were earning the most money, and it was LA County. And I thought, well, heck, if they can do it, I can do it. And so honest to God, I started interviewing. I set up some interviews. We didn't have the internet yet.
Yeah.
You know, it was all by phone and by mail. And we didn't even have fax machines yet. And because this was back in the mid 1980s. So I moved to LA when the first Olympics were there in 1984. And got there, had 3 job offers, negotiated a move, and got there and went, what the hell did I just do? I don't know anybody. What the heck? And then, that lasted a couple of days, and then I was off to the races.
That's incredible. And honestly, I always am so fascinated by people who, like, I come from a family who moved countries.
Yeah.
And then I hear these stories of like people just even up and leaving state to state. And I've done that, but I've also done that with the comfort of leaving with family. So it's very
Right.
different. So
Yeah.
when I hear these stories of a person just up and leaving, I'm always intrigued about like, wow, what was the courage behind getting to that point and how did you make that transition? Because it takes a lot of courage and faith to know that whatever you're walking into is going to work out or at least be some sort of lesson or experience that you're going to carry with you in your life.
Well, and looking back on that, all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. I interviewed with several companies, but the company that I went with, Anita, this is a great story, if I may share it.
Absolutely.
Back then we had phone booths. And I interviewed with this big company, and then I stopped at a gas station where there was a phone booth because I needed to make a call. And I was looking through the window of the phone booth, and the building next door had the name of this medical device company that I knew about on it. And I thought, oh, okay. So I just walked in their front door after I was finished with my call, talked to the receptionist, gave her my resume, asked if their president or VP of sales or whatever was in. And they brought me in immediately because of who I was working for. And they put me in the boardroom and they made me a job offer the next day. And that's who I went to work for. So was that a coincidence? Not a chance. Not a chance. I know now, back then I thought, gosh, this is great. But I look back at that now and I think, that was divine guidance. Same thing finding my apartment. It's just all of it, all the pieces of the puzzle unwrap. And then started my first company a couple of years later in LA and Southern California, especially. Well, all of California and really a lot of the West Coast is just so entrepreneurial. And so I was led there. I know that now. I didn't know that at the time. I was clueless. I didn't know any of this stuff existed. I was a good Catholic girl. What the heck did I know about woo-woo? Nothing.
I
Yeah.
love the way you said it. What the heck did I know about the woo?
No, nothing. Yeah.
It's funny though, just even looking at that whole story of like you were literally following your intuition because if something in you wasn't like, oh, that looks familiar, let me just pop in, the opportunities would have ceased to exist. So that's
Right.
incredible when you
Yeah.
think about it. And yeah, no coincidences for sure. That's incredible. So, for those who don't know your story, how did you start getting into the woo woo? Because, again, you didn't actually have these experiences right off the bat. It just was something that I guess you kind of harvested a curiosity for, and it kind of then started to reveal itself to you, is the way I'll put it.
Very much so. Unlike you with your culture, with the Armenian culture, and so many of the cultures around the world have, all of them do. They all have spirituality. They all have what I would call woo. Woo in Taoism, Anita, means source. I don't know if you knew that, but that I think is really enlightening, and woo woo is just a fun word. So the closest thing I had to any of this was my mother used to read the horoscopes in the paper. There was a woman named Jean Dixon, my whole childhood in the 60s and 70s, and my mother would always read the horoscopes. And that was the closest thing I knew to, and I thought, oh yeah, whatever. And one day I had a girlfriend who gave me a book called Anatomy of the Spirit by Carolyn Mays for a birthday gift. And I was in my mid-30s at this point, already married and a mom and doing all the mom business, wife things, not necessarily in that order. And, it depended on the day. And this Carolyn Mace woman called herself a medical intuitive. And I thought, well, what the heck is that? I'd never heard of that before. And I was in the hospital supply business. So I was helping people heal, but through their surgeons and their physicians and their medical providers with devices that I had invented at this point and was manufacturing. And so back then we didn't have the internet yet. And I did the old-fashioned thing, Anita, and I went to a bookstore. I went to a Barnes and Noble bookstore to see if they had anything along these lines. I thought they're going to be more likely to have it even than my local library. So I found a book there called Hands of Light by Dr. Barbara Brennan, who was a former NASA physicist who parlayed very complex quantum physics principles into understandable English. And she talked about and taught about how to use energy frequencies to help people heal. Well, again, I'm helping people heal with supplies. I thought, oh, this is interesting. So I called her school, which at the time was on Long Island in New York. And I said, do you guys have anybody teaching this stuff in my area? And sure enough, they did. And they said, we have a graduate who opened her own school, and here's her name and number. And so I called her and I studied with her for 6 years. And not full time. Certainly I went once a week, and my family and friends were saying, why are you doing this? And I'd say, I have no clue. And they say, what are you going to do with it? I said, maybe nothing. I don't know. It's just really interesting. And then it parlayed over the years. And I went full time I sold my last surgical device manufacturing company about 10 years ago. And so after that, I wrote my first book and started my podcast and, started talking to clients. And that's a fun story in itself that I'm happy to share if you want how all that came about. I'm with my mentor. Her name's Susan, and I'm still in touch with her. She's in her mid-80s. Actually, she just had her knee replaced yesterday, and she was texting me on the way home from the hospital. Can you scan me and do a healing on me? Like, yeah, the student's helping the teacher. So, but this is going on a 40-year relationship now. And when I was with her, and this was many years ago, she'd be doing a healing on me, Anita, and my deceased loved one's spirits would line the table. I was on a massage table. And so this one day, this spirit of this dead Pope walks in. And I said, he's got his Pope hat on and his shepherd's rod and the whole 9 yards. And I said, well, who are you? And he said, I'm Clement. And I said, okay, I'm really sorry, but I've never heard of a Pope Clement. And he laughed. And he said, well, I was number 6. I said, okay, great. How may I help you? And I'm thinking, why is this guy here? Why is this spirit here? And he said, you need to teach the world what happens when somebody dies, because it's been so bastardized over the millennia and people are afraid, and you know what happens. And so you just need to get on with it. You just need to, teach the world what happens. And I said, well, thank you so much for stopping by. But you see, I'm a businesswoman and people will think I'm nuts if I do that. And he laughed. So I'm arguing with this dead Pope spirit, mind you. And I wasn't arguing, I was just turning him down. And he said, no, seriously, everything you've done in your career has prepared you for this. You need to just get on with it. Treat me like a Nike ad. Just go do it. And I said, well, again, thank you so much for stopping by, but I'm really not interested. So he leaves. A little bit later, I'm in the car, I'm leaving, I'm driving home. And just for kicks, I looked up on my phone, Pope Clement VI. Well, Anita, he was in office during the Black Plague. And he's best known for his purse for the dying and his purse for the dead. I thought, God, Ryan, you can't make that up. And so he prodded me for another couple of years. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not interested. I was helping family and friends. And so first time I saw that was when my mom was dying. We can get into that later in a minute. 2 more quick points to this story. A couple of years later, I'm sitting in church between my husband and my son. The priest from the altar on his sermon, he says, wouldn't it be interesting if somebody could really tell us if the angels and our loved ones greet us and lead us into paradise, like in the prayer we say at the end of every funeral? And I'm getting elbowed by my guys on either side. And I'm thinking, God, seriously? From the pulpit, you're giving me grief about this? Okay. So I wrote angelic attendants. I put up AskJulieRyan.com. And I thought, I'm just going to get nailed. I know I'm going to get nailed, but okay, I'll take this step. So a few months later, I'm giving a talk in Texas to a business audience, mostly men, C-suite executives, a business talk. At the end of my talk, Anita, this guy comes up and he's got his iPad open to AskJulieRyan.com. I said, here we go. And he said, is this you? And I'm thinking, yes, that's my picture right there on the cover. And he said, I'd really like to sit with you at lunch because I want to know more. And I smiled and I said, oh, that would be lovely. And in my head, I'm thinking, great, I'm going to get pummeled for an hour at lunch by this guy. So fast forward, we sit at this table. There's 8 people at the table, 7 C-suite guys, and me. All they wanted to talk about was woo-woo. Not about the conference, not about their companies, not about my talk, not about anybody else's talk. They only wanted to talk about spiritual things. And I thought, okay, God, I'm in. Both feet. These are 3 really big signs for me that I just need to do that. And that was really when I said, okay, let's go.
Wow. So, interestingly enough, I've heard that story just because I've been really diving into your work the last month. But the thing that really always stands out when you think about it is you have all these signs where internally you're afraid to take that step or you're mistrusting yourself. And it's like you're getting these signs from source that, hey, no, this is the path you need to follow. Lean in. And so it's interesting though, because you don't really typically associate businessmen with the woo. And
Oh,
so to have that experience where it's like, no, we're interested, tell us more about how this works. And it's a very like eye-opening thing. I have a friend who she's an astrologer and she predominantly works with C-suite men who lean into using astrology to help them
oh
work
yeah.
with the energy to create revenue in their business. And she was like, I'm pretty sure all billionaires do this. They just keep it really hush
They
hush.
do. Absolutely. I have a lot of those clients too that are heads of big corporations, some of them publicly traded. And yeah, it's totally undercover because of the same thing that I was afraid of. I thought people are going to think I'm nuts and it's going to affect my business and all my employees. And, not only my revenues flow, but a lot of families' revenue flows
Yeah.
too. So, but that's a great example, I think, too, Anita, what we all do, and I think we're hardwired to do, and that is to use our imaginations to envision something bad happening when it's such a waste of time because we can use our imaginations just as easily to envision good things, and our thoughts create our reality. And people will push back on me every now and again and they'll say, oh, that's just mumbo jumbo, manifestation stuff. And I'll say, yeah, maybe, but think about it. Every piece of clothing you're wearing, every chair you're sitting in, every wall that came up was an idea before it manifested into reality. So everything in our world was an idea first.
Absolutely.
Everything that's solid, not the clouds, but even a lot of plants. A lot of plants are grafted together. They've got horticulture experts that are mixing seeds and mixing genres and stuff like that, and that's how you get a hot pink iris because they've mixed a couple of colors of irises together to breed different colors. So really, pretty much everything in our world that isn't nature, and even some of nature, was an idea that became a reality.
Beautifully said. So I'm curious for the hyper analytical person who's still listening to this going, okay, this sounds nice, but this is total bullshit.
Yeah.
How would you really grasp, or how did you grasp your brain around the things that you were starting to see while also having been very highly analytical at first?
Just so much practice and so much experience. And when somebody says, I don't believe any of this, I say, that's fine. We don't have to talk about it. We can talk about football or the weather or gardening or whatever you want. And then I'll say, have you ever experienced something where perhaps you thought of somebody and then they texted you or they called you or they emailed you or you ran into them in the grocery store and you said, oh my gosh, what a coincidence. I just was thinking of you and here you are. Well, that's no coincidence. That's your intuitive abilities. I have a graduate of my class. This is such a great story, Anita. He lives in Maryland and his best friend lives in South Carolina. And one day he was driving home from someplace, from work or someplace, and he just had a thought in his head he heard turn left and go buy a lottery ticket. And he thought, really? There was some big jackpot or something. So he did. And he thought, oh, I just want to go home. And he heard again, turn left and go buy a lottery ticket. There was a little gas station or mini mart or something on the way. And as he was driving into the parking lot of this mini mart, there was a car in front of him with South Carolina plates on it. It was his best friend in the car who was blowing through town on his way to somewhere else. And he was going to call my guy, but they saw each other. Now, what's the chance of that happening? That's just one example. There are millions of them that I can tell you about. Okay, thousands, maybe millions might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's just stuff like that. And you keep having all this stuff happen and you're thinking, okay, I can't make that up. You can't make it up. In my last big class, angelic attendant training, we were doing a past life section. And so one of my students said, I have a little boy who's 11 and he's just fascinated with planes and jets. I mean, this kid, like, was he a pilot in a past life? What's the deal here? And so we did what my students are trained to do. And some of them were seeing a biplane that was yellow, several of them. Some of them got that, yes, he was on the Wright brothers team. And I got that he was on the Wright brothers team. He was like the unsung hero. He was the mechanic and he was also the designer of a lot of that plane, but the Wright brothers took all the credit, but he was in Dayton and also Kitty Hawk, and I also got his name was Charlie. So one of the students, Anita, looks it up. There's a guy named Charlie Taylor who was the inventor of the engine and a lot of the plane that the Wright brothers used and is the unsung hero. So you can't make that stuff up. I mean, that's too random that all of us were getting that information. So it's just stuff like that and years of examples like that convince us that, all right, there's really way more to this story than meets the eye.
That's amazing. And I love that you use these examples in your work where it's like you can actually look it up and you will find the traces of it. So it's like there's no way you could actually make up what's coming to you.
Yeah.
You just have this knowing. And I think shifting gears for a second, I think it's interesting because a lot of people, we tend to assume either you're born with these abilities or you're not. Mm-hmm. And you really challenge that idea with anyone can really tune in. It's about learning to master and connect. So what does intuition actually feel like from your perspective?
Intuition is the ability to access universal intelligence on any topic. And to your point just a minute ago, everybody's born with the ability to do this. And little children are very intuitive, very, very, until their parents or their grandparents or their teachers or sometimes even their friends encourage them to shut it down because they'll say, oh, honey, nobody's standing there. That's just your imagination. You know, little Susie really doesn't exist. And this little girl's going, yes, she does. I play with her every day. She's her imaginary friend, but she's a spirit that the grown-ups can't see, which is why I wrote my children's book series, the Angel Messages series, and it has wonderful illustrations in it. There's four books. And I had so many moms and grandmothers over the years, Anita, say to me, how do I explain to my child or my grandchild that, yes, that information that they have from my father, who's been dead for 40 years, is correct. And the child is saying, yeah, Grandpa comes to play with me at night in my bedroom and he tells her stories and they're true. Some of them that my client didn't even know, she had to ask her mother or her grandmother, and they end up being true. And this kid's 3. and the grandfather's been dead for 40 years. Or how do I explain to my child or my grandchild that they know information from a past life, like what I was talking about with this Wright brothers guy. How does he know that he was in an infantry division in the Civil War, and he knows his name and his dog tag number and where he was stationed? Again, this child can't read yet. And then lastly, how do I explain to my child that grandma's in heaven now? And little Johnny's saying, no, she's not. She's asleep in that box up there in the front of the room, because there's the visitation at the funeral home. And so I was encouraged by so many mothers and grandmothers primarily. And that's why I wrote those books. They're as much for the grown-ups as they are for the kids, but they're like 15 sentences in the whole thing. It's about the pictures and it's real, the illustrations. And so long way of saying we all come in with the ability. We shut it down, most of us, unless we're encouraged either by our family or our culture. And we shut it down like 6, 7, 8, something like that. And then something happens that triggers us usually. And we'll say, okay, I wonder if there's more to the story. A lot of the time it's the loss of a loved one. And people will say, is this really the end? Because when we lose a loved one, not only do we mourn the passing of that person, but it makes us really think about, oh God, I'm going to be there myself one day. What really happens? And that oftentimes is a catalyst for people to reach out to a medium or to read a book or something along those lines.
Fair enough. I know for me, 2020 was kind of the height of just all things woo. I was starting to do my research, and so I was learning about transitions. And ironically, a few years later, 2023, I first had my first experience where I could almost to a T predict when a great grandma of mine was going to pass to a T. So I was like, I think she has about 10 days. And sure enough, 4 days later, she was gone. And my aunt, well, my mom's aunt, was like, how on earth did your daughter know? And it was just because I was looking at the signs. She was already talking about seeing family members that had passed on, and to like her voice had changed and the way she was just speaking had changed, and I was picking up on her smell before I had like actually gone to visit her. And I was like, yeah, I don't know, something about this last call, it just sounds like she has about like maybe 10 days or so, ballpark. And sure enough, that was December 26th, January 1st she passes, and I was just like, oh, that was a little too spot on even for my liking.
Yeah.
All right. And so it was interesting though, because I just had the loss of my grandfather. And again, I was looking through this work and I was just like, but I don't have the dang signs with you. And then it took me a minute and I was just like, maybe I don't have the signs because you also are very aware that I know the signs. And so I was like, okay, I can kind of see it, because he was already about 2 months in starting to kind of go, well, when I do pass, don't cry over me. And sure enough, the last day that he was cognitive, he told my mom, like, hey, I want you to take care of your mom, get rid of these phone numbers in my phone. And he was like kind of doing his like last minute plans. And it's interesting because a lot of people don't realize that we kind of have a knowing of when we're going, whether or not we actually admit it. And so I do believe that we have, just like we have a birthday, we have a death day that we have chosen. And it brings up this kind of like awakening. And every time I think about it now, I'm like, wow, how interesting is it that it brings up this like spiritual component to us. And after he passed, when we went back to the house for the first time, I was like, oh, he's here. And my grandma was like, how do you know? I don't even feel him. And I go, simple. When he was still in the hospital, the house felt very empty. When I came home, it doesn't feel that same emptiness. So he's here.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
you bring up a really good point, though, too, Anita, and that is university-based research shows that 90% of people at the end of their lives see the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets as they're transitioning from about 6 months on. And so it used to be when we'd hear grandma say, "Oh, I'm seeing my mom who's been dead for 50 years." And the family is all saying, "Oh, it's the morphine from hospice." No, it's not. Grandma can actually see her mother and communicate with her mother. And now that there's university-based research, not research done by some company, but for their own benefit, but independent, university level, which is very hard to do. I had to do that for my surgical device inventions before I could get the FDA and other governing bodies that are similar in different countries to approve my products to be sold. We had to do university-based research at big, huge academic medical centers. And so that's no joke to get that done. And it really brings so much credibility to the table. And I believe people have been able to see that since the beginning of time. And it's in all cultures, all religions, at some point, might be buried, but it's
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. And it's interesting because just thinking back with my great grandma, my mom, when she was talking to her aunt, she was like, "Oh, don't worry about her. She's just a little delusional." And I was like, or she might just be semi in between worlds, semi. And she was just like, your daughter is very into the woo. I'm not entirely sure I like this conversation. And later on, as my grandpa was passing, she was like, that's a spot on thing. And ironically, his scent came to me literally 2 weeks before, and I would get the number two. And I was like, two what? And I was very trying to understand it and make my own sense of it, like two. And then eventually it was 2 weeks on the dot from that date. And I was just like, oh, okay, that's interesting. All right. And so I think about these experiences I've had, and then I think about experiences that I've heard, and I'm like, we're all kind of guided. It's just whether or not we recognize it and are able to tune in. So I'm curious, though, in your perspective, because there's also the aspect of how do we distinguish intuition from something that we're actually fearing?
Well, intuition is instant. When we ask a question or make a statement and we hear something in our heads, I always say, when you think about it, that's your brain. You say, our heads are like big satellite dishes and they receive and they transmit frequencies. Every spirit has a frequency they keep throughout all their lifetimes. Every thought has a frequency. Every tree, every flower, every animal. And so you want to talk to your grandfather, you just go, "Hey, Grandpa." That tunes your satellite dish head to his frequency. Whether he's reincarnated or not is irrelevant. Whether you knew the person you want to talk to or not is irrelevant. Who you want to talk to, Moses, Elvis, Mother Teresa, it doesn't matter. You just think of them. That tunes your satellite dish head to them. And then it opens up kind of a two-way radio communication, Anita, and you just say something. And they're going to answer you, and it's going to be boom, fast as you can snap your fingers, or a lot of the time even before. And that really trips people up when they don't even have the thought out all the way and they're already receiving an answer. The answer feels like a thought in your head. And they think, well, how can that be? Well, time doesn't exist in the spirit world. Time's a human creation. So they've already got what your thought is, whether it's a statement or a question, and they're responding to you. The other thing that's really interesting that I've learned for over 30 years of doing this is all spirit communication is numbers. It's numerical because mathematics is the universal language. So the communication comes in numbers into our brains, and then our brains act as decoders for it. And the decoding can take the place of a visual that you get, a smell like you were smelling your grandfather's cologne or whatever, just a knowing, a thought that you know, or a sound or a feeling. You may get goosebumps or you may get the chills or something like that. And it reminds me of back in World War II when the Allies had decoders they would intercept the Nazi messages and they would send them to the decoding division, and they broke the code. That's a real thing. They broke the code of those messages, and they could figure out where the Nazis were going to go, what was their next move, all of that, and it helped win the war. Well, all of our brains are decoders too, whether we realize it or not. And Spirit's always communicating with us. And it's whether or not we choose to follow where we're being led. Now, keep in mind, most of us are receiving more than 70,000 thoughts a day. So there's a lot of chatter there, which is why people will say, well, that's what prayer is about. That's what meditation's about, is quieting the mind so you can hear what those messages are. But it's all numbers. It's all numerical.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
So fascinating. And one thing I want to back up for a quick second is you literally said it does not matter if a person's already reincarnated. You can already
Right.
connect to their energy.
Yeah.
So that literally means, if we think about it, if we have someone in our lives that we might be, call it, having issues with or just wanting to connect with, but haven't maybe done so like you and I are doing right now, we can also tune into their frequency and have a soul to soul conversation, almost like you're going to the CEO of their soul.
Yes, and somebody doesn't have to be dead in order to telepathically communicate with them. I talk to alive people all the time telepathically. I talk to animals, I talk to trees, I talk to whatever. And that's how I do the healing. Is it's my spirit connecting with their spirit. And they can be the bitch from hell. It doesn't matter because everybody's spirit is pure love. That's a role they're playing. When we're dying, it's the woman who raised the person who's dying is the one that runs the show from the spirit world. And I've had so many people over the years say, oh, my mom was horrible. She's the last person I would want there. And I say, that was a role she was playing. Her spirit's pure love. When you meet up with her in heaven, take her an Oscar statue and give it to her and say, Mom, you played that role great. You deserve an Academy Award for this. Because we're all playing roles. It's like we're starring in our own movies. And we think of the most atrocious person that ever lived, Attila the Hun, Hitler, whoever. And we say, well, we hope he's burning in hell for eternity. Well, his spirit's pure love. That was a role he was playing, which is a really hard pill to swallow for a lot of people, especially those of us raised in the Judeo-Christian Western culture.
Boy.
And yet I've heard it a bazillion times, Anita, from spirit. And it's really fascinating. It's so different from how things have been manipulated by cultures and civilizations and religions to control the masses. You better do this. You better pay me this money or you're going to go burn in hell. You eat meat on Friday, you're going to burn in hell for eternity. Well, they changed that rule a long time ago. Well, what happened to all those people that ate meat on Friday when it was still a rule? Are they burning in hell? No, it's ridiculous. It was used to control the masses.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what's really interesting is you talk about in angelic attendance how technically we all grow up in these religions that aren't necessarily, I don't want to call it factual, but like it's not how things necessarily are portrayed in the spirit realm. And yet, when we kind of start to realize and recognize the reality of our bodies are just temporary homes for the soul,
Right.
we're able to kind of shift our perspective. But there's also this now shift in our culture where people are starting to recognize that the woo or the spiritual realm is more prominent, yet they have these religious ties that they're kind of like dancing between. And one thing that really intrigued me is also you've studied Kabbalah quite a bit, and that was also part of your getting into how you were learning how to heal. So what was that shift like for you from like a purely religious standpoint to now opening your worldview up to what was truth?
I went through 12 years of Catholic schools. So, cradle Catholic. And even as a child, I remember being in class, like third, fourth grade, and asking the nun who was my teacher, who I had wonderful nuns. You know, people talk about these horrible nuns. Every nun I know has been wonderful. My My son was educated by nuns. They were wonderful. The ones I had were wonderful. And I remember saying, well, sister, blah, 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 blah. What's the question? She'd say, it's a mystery. I remember being an 8-year-old and thinking, that's not a good answer. That doesn't satisfy me at all. So I am what I call a cafeteria Catholic. I take what I like, I leave what I don't like. And there's so many similarities in all of the cultures, in all of their religions. They're all saying the same thing. It's the golden rule, basically. Treat others as you want to be treated. So the rituals I find wonderful. I still am a practicing Catholic. I go to mass every weekend, and I see energetic things happening during the service that are they're not from religion, they're from spiritual. And I'm finding also that the zeitgeist is really changing, to your point, that people that are still doing religions, and actually there's a lot of people coming back to religions right now. A lot of young people are coming back to religion, but they're balancing it with that thought of spirituality. But when you think about it, all of the religions, let's just take Catholicism because that's the one I'm the most familiar with. Everything has since the beginning of time has been orchestrated to help us be more spiritual. Many of the world's best or greatest basilicas and cathedrals are built on ley lines or dragon lines or energy lines that are ancient. Many of the altars are placed right at the center of where those lines intersect. The Gothic cathedrals, that whole, spiritual going up, the acoustics in there, they're supposed to help you be more spiritual from a sound standpoint, from a beauty standpoint, the stained glass windows, the carvings, all that stuff. The Gregorian chants and the music helps raise your vibrational level. The incense, the candles, you got your olfactory going. So you walk in a lot of those churches, especially those old churches in Europe and elsewhere that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and so many people have prayed in there. There's a feeling when you walk in there. And that's all about the spirituality. It's about how can we help people get more in tune with spirit so they can be led. And then the rituals and all that jazz. There's a prayer said at the end of every Roman Catholic funeral called In Paradisum. And it talks about how the angels and your loved ones will greet you and lead you into paradise. And that's what I talk about in Angelic Attendants. It's a 5th century Gregorian chant is where it originated. I had to research it when I was writing my book. So that I saw in the Catholic Church. When I studied Kabbalah, which is ancient Jewish mysticism, and there are many schools of thought, Anita, that Jesus was taught Kabbalistic healing in Africa and elsewhere, and in India. You know how the Bible leaves off like when he's 12 and it picks back up when he's 30. Well, what the heck was he doing for all that time?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he was in India. They have research that shows that he was in India and other places. And there are lots of schools of thought that he learned Kabbalistic healing. The Kabbalistic healing that I learned is so powerful that it's only taught orally. It's never been written down. It was throughout the centuries only taught to rabbis who were over 40 who were married. Well, I was a good Catholic girl in my 30s that I was married, but I didn't have any of those other qualifications. Yeah, and it's all about the transfer of energy, which is what I do with my students. When I teach, it's 10% technique, it's 90% transfer of energy. It's being able to hold the vibration at a super high level, which is the spirit channel. You connect to spirit on this super high vibration, and the body can get there. And then you can do anything you want with it. You can go anywhere you want. Because I always say, spirit doesn't communicate on the I feel crappy channels because the vibration's too low.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true. Actually, speaking of healing, one thing that intrigued me about something you were saying was you say that technically you can channel some healing for a person in this life, and
Yeah.
you might not see the result in the current incarnation, but you've helped heal their soul. So how do you get to the place that you know that you've facilitated that healing without seeing the result in this current lifetime, for example? Is it just a knowing?
No, most of the time there will be a change in their health, how they're feeling, if we regenerate a new kidney or liver or spleen or something like that with stem cell energy, which I do every day that I'm working. Oftentimes it'll show up on a subsequent MRI or CT scan or X ray. And through the years, I've had doctors call me and say, okay, what the heck are you doing? And how does this work? And then I'll explain to them that every cell is a nucleus. Every nucleus is surrounded by cytoplasm, a watery gel that I described during the healing. And our bodies have a centrifugal force in them that spins that causes the cells to divide and replicate to the tune of billions of them a day. In this healing, I'm watching the same thing happen. I'm just watching it in warp speed. So nobody ever heals anybody else ever, Anita. No doctor, no healer like me, no medical provider, no chiropractor. Nobody ever heals anybody else. I like to use the example of you go to the emergency room with a big cut on your leg and the doctor's going to stitch it up, but the doctor doesn't make your skin grow back. You make your own skin grow back. And that's how all this works. So the work that I do, the healing has happened on the energetic level. It's going to integrate into their body. That can happen instantly. It can take days, weeks, months, may need complementary care like change in diet, physical therapy, surgery, whatever. But it's always the person's spirit's prerogative as to how the healing is integrated, or even if the healing is integrated. Because we never know what somebody's spirit's here to explore and experience. And so I've said many times that sometimes the healing is death. And people go, what? And I'll say, yeah, sometimes. My sister-in-law's mom just passed a few weeks ago, and we were at the funeral in Ohio. And my mom, when she was alive, if somebody was at the end of their lives and they were suffering, she'd go to mass and light a candle that God would just take them and they wouldn't suffer anymore. So, and then the person would die like in a day or two. And it got to the point where we called it Mary Jo and her killer candles. So, my sister-in-law's mom's at the end of her life, she's suffering. And my mom died in 2002, so long time ago. And I said, hey, mother, if there are killer candles in heaven, can you light one for Phyllis? Because she needs to come join you. She died in less than 24 hours. So who knew there were killer candles in heaven? But, yeah, I mean, we can send the healing to them. And that's what I do on my call-in show every Thursday night, is people call in from all over the world, and we can talk to your dead grandma, we can scan your cat, I can scan you medically, we can do a past life, we can talk to your angels, whatever. And it's a blast because I never know who's calling. I'll never know what their question's going to be. I never know what spirit's going to say. But I always tell everybody that's listening and watching, okay, envision what I'm describing in this healing, because we're all sending healing energy. It's like the power of prayer. And again, there's lots of university-based research that when you have a whole bunch of different people that are concentrating and focusing on the same thing, miraculous things can happen. And so I'll say, okay, we're sending the healing to you. It's already done on the energetic level. It's going to integrate into your body, but that's going to be your decision. It's like you give somebody a gift. You can't make them open it. You can't make them like it. All you can do is give them the gift. And that's how I look at this. It's part of the healing equation. Eastern medicine, Western medicine, energy medicine. It's all pieces of the puzzle of helping the person heal themselves.
That's a beautiful answer. And I'm just going to say it's funny because as we were going through that whole thing with my grandpa, there was one day where my grandma goes, well, how do we make sure that he gets healed? And I literally was like, Grandma, I don't want to be a buzzkill, but like he has to want the healing for him to heal.
Exactly. Yeah.
And she was just like, but we want him to heal. And I was like, I can want him to heal. You can want him to heal, but he has to want him to heal. And it was just this interesting thing. And it just reminds me of how the soul is always in control with source. Doesn't matter how much we interfere, we have to kind of let go, so to speak.
Well, and a lot of people need to hear that in order to pass. They need to have their family members tell them it's okay for them to go watch over us from heaven. But the other thing to remember, too, that I think is really important about that, Anita, and you were very wise in counseling your grandmother that way, because we all decide when we go, where we go, how we go, who's with us or not when we go, and what the circumstances are that surround our passing, regardless of whether it's instantly, like in a case of a homicide or suicide, or whether it's over a prolonged period of time, days, weeks, months, even years. Because always remember, time doesn't exist in the spirit world. So 100 years in a human life to us may not even be a blip on the radar screen in the spirit world.
Fascinating. So fascinating. I have to ask, do you find that unresolved emotional wounds or trauma can make it harder for people, generally speaking, to trust their own intuition and their own guidance, or does that not play a role?
Always plays a role. When I'm doing a healing on somebody, there's always an emotional component to the healing. There's always an energy block that has been caused by an emotional event. Could be something basic like somebody called you a poopy face when you were little and it hurt your feelings when you were 3. And we look at that as adults and we think, well, that was no big deal. But as a 3-year-old, it's a really big deal to your 3-year-old little self. Or it could be something really dramatic. I always go in for where did that energy block begin? Because when we can get it out by the root, all the other emotional events that have piled on top of it throughout a lifetime are all eradicated in one fell swoop. And how I tell where the energy block is, again, I'm not going for the most dramatic or traumatic. I'm going for where did it begin? Because unlike psychotherapy, when they say, now, Anita, we're going to talk about your life and it's going to be like we're peeling an onion a layer at a time. I want to get the damn onion out by the root. Let's just boom. Let's get on with it. Move on. Let's go. There's what I call the energy field membrane, which is like this big plastic bag, if you can imagine that is the container for the spirit and the body, the energy that comprises the spirit and the body. And when there's a tear or a hole in it, there's an energy leak. Energy leaks are precipitated by an emotional event that caused an energy block and enough pressure built up over the years that it caused a blowout. There's always an energy leak before any kind of medical condition arises, 100% of the time. So when we go in and we figure out where did that begin, as soon as we illuminate it, it's eradicated, energy field membrane heals, body's working on full power, helps the body regain and maintain health. I believe it's the most important part of a healing because we can fix body parts all day long, but if you're leaking power, what's the point? May I use an analogy for that?
Yeah.
Imagine going to the pet store to buy a goldfish. They're going to put it in a plastic bag of water in order for you to get it home. I was taught in Catholic school that the soul or the spirit is someplace in the chest area. That's not what I perceive. What I perceive is the body's inside the spirit. That's why you'll see halos around old masters' paintings of saints or angels. You know, it's their energy field. It's their aura. It's their spirit. We all have one. We all have a halo. And so back to the fish in a plastic bag, if you imagine that the fish represents our body, the water represents our spirit because the body's inside the spirit, and the plastic bag represents our energy-filled membrane or the container. If there's a pinhole in that plastic bag and water is draining out a drop at a time, for a long time that fish is going to be fine. However, when enough water drains out, that fish is going to be in trouble. And that's what happens to the human body over time.
So fascinating. So fascinating. And you're right when you think about it, because what I teach often is that our emotions track into our bodies, and every emotion has a subsequent action or some sort of body, whether or not you've suppressed the emotion or you allowed it to move through you. And so when we think about it, every time, like, the body keeps the score,
Right.
and it ends up having that internal knowing. So this conversation has been so fascinating, I have to admit. And I want to just wrap up with firstly, what are you most excited about right now with the work you're doing, and how can people connect with you?
AskJulieRyan.com is where you can find everything. Anybody that wants a free copy of Angelic Attendance, my book, What Happens When Somebody's Dying, we're all going to be there one day. We're all going to have a loved one be in that position. It has illustrations in it about how the angels and our loved ones are positioned. AskJulieRyan.com. You'll see there's a button on the right at the top of the homepage. Send me a free copy. We'll send you a free digital or audiobook version, and we have it in Spanish as well if you prefer Spanish. So I'm excited about that. I'm working with the U.S. military to get this book into all the chaplains' offices at all the bases around the world, and working with the Gold Star families who are military people who've lost a loved one in the line of service. And I'm really excited about that. We've got a phone app that's coming out. The Ask Julie Ryan phone app will be available soon, and we're going to have a feature on that called Spirit Chat, where you can upload a 1-minute video of a question, and then I'll answer it with a 1-minute video back to you. And it's a free app. It has a subscription level too, but anybody can download it and access all that Ask Julie Ryan stuff. We were working really hard on that for about a year. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about just all the changes that I'm seeing in the world. As I mentioned, the zeitgeist is changing and people are becoming more interested in the spiritual side of the equation. So look at you. I mean, you're young and you're interested, and you're helping people learn and open their minds to new thoughts that really are going back to the future, because they've been around since the beginning of time. They've just been squashed. I think a lot of them in the past 150, 200 years. And now we're becoming really adept at integrating the spiritual into our everyday lives and even our religions. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Well, honestly, I'm just very inspired by people like you who are kind of I don't want to call it scapegoats, but the ones who started really moving this path forward and making it free for us to actually speak about and integrate. And I always end the show with a rapid fire. So think one word, one sentence, whatever first comes to mind.
Okay.
So, do you believe sorry, that is not the right question. Excuse me. Let's start with, what is a word for your current season?
A word, fun.
Love it.
Yeah.
Favorite song that gets you excited or dancing?
Can't stop the feeling.
Love it. What is one intuitive practice you do daily?
I do a meditation that's a clarity meditation that helps discern between what's a real fear and what's fake fear, because 99.9% of our fears are fake.
Amazing. What is your favorite book that's actually made an impact on your life?
There's one I'm reading right now that's wonderful. Actually, I've got it right here. It's called, and I'm learning so much from it. It's called The Magic of Mother Nature by Christine Page, MD. And she's a physician and a surgeon. So, of course, she's looking at things from a scientific background, but she's an amazing psychic and intuitive and all of that. And she has combined research with mythology, with cultures, with all of that for all of these holy sites around the world, and talked about what are the archaeologists, what have they found, what is the new technology showing for underground tunnels, what we were talking about earlier, how many of the most famous holy sites, whether it be a basilica or a cathedral or a temple or a pyramid or whatever, oftentimes the main altar is right where these energy lines intersect. I'm finding that fascinating. Probably the book that's made the biggest impression, it would be a tie between Anatomy of the Spirit and Barbara Brennan's Hands of Light, because that's what really started me on this trajectory.
Beautiful. And What is something you want women to stop apologizing for?
Their power, their opinion, their knowing, their, yeah, well, I think we should do that, but they're afraid to say anything because they're afraid that somebody's going to look at them like they're nuts or they're not as smart. That women's intuition. Keep in mind that it's the mother spirit or the woman who raised somebody who runs the show from the spirit world when they're dying. That woman's spirit brings in the angels, brings in the spirits of deceased loved ones, brings in the pets. That was a huge revelation for me. I thought God probably had a department in heaven of angels, and they'd be like, okay, Mary Elizabeth's dying in Mississippi, send an angel down to help. And no, it's Mary Elizabeth's mother. And if her mother's still alive, it's her maternal grandmother who's doing it. So the mothers are really, we're the ones that make everything run in the world. I mean,
Much
when it
like
comes
how
down
we
to
make
it,
a household run.
yeah, the women. It's the women. And, those witches that were burned at the stake, they were all healers.
Yeah.
And it was the well-educated men who wanted the allopathic form of medicine that were doing it. It's nuts, but it was all those healers. They were trying to get rid of them, but you can't squash something that's true.
Mic drop right there.
Yeah.
Well, Julie, what I appreciate so much about what you're doing is that regardless, you are a constant reminder that despite the beliefs that we may have grown up with, there's always an invitation to do and follow into your own knowing, to slow down, to listen, and to trust ourselves a little more deeply. And just to remember that we may be more supported, guided, and connected than we realize. So I just want to thank you again for your sharing your wisdom and just the work that you do in this world, because I know that you brought me and my family great relief, especially with your book. I ended up showing them the little page from Angelic Attendants where it shows all the little levels.
Illustrations. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate how you've actually normalized and made the transition seem very much more smooth rather than scary, is the way I'll phrase it.
Yeah. I was led. I kept kicking and screaming at the beginning, but here I am.
Well, thank you so much, and I look forward to connecting with you more soon.
Me too. Thanks for having me.